And she also wrote these letters when she was little that we have kind of saying, I hope my daddy doesn't die. So there was some kind of.
Even though he was a flawed human being, idol to millions, but a flawed human being nonetheless. But in her eyes, her dad was a god. And just to hear that she even felt that he might.
What if the final hour of the king was nothing like the quiet, lonely scene the world has been told? Picture a hidden reel captured right in Graceland's own back rooms, showing Elvis Presley, or Alvis as insiders call him, surrounded by his family, the Memphis Mafia, and even his fiancée Ginger, as the clock strikes the very moment he slipped away. In this video, we pull back the curtain on the new footage that finally exposes how Elvis Presley truly died, a dramatic, complex moment that contradicts every story sold to us for decades. Get ready for an in-depth, eye-opening analysis of those final 24 hours, the unlikely presence of his inner circle, and the surprising truth about the day he left us on August 16, 1977. Let's dive in. What if the last minutes of the king were not the hushed, solitary scene that has haunted generations? Imagine a hidden reel captured in the very back rooms of Graceland that reveals Elvis Presley, known to some insiders as Alvis in a quiet nod to his private life, surrounded by his family, the Memphis Mafia, and even his fiancée Ginger as the clock struck the moment he slipped away. This video pulls back the curtain on the new footage that finally exposes how Elvis Presley truly died, a dramatic, complex moment that contradicts every story that has been sold to us for decades. Get ready for an in-depth, eye-opening analysis of those final 24 hours, the unlikely presence of his inner circle, and the surprising truth about the day he left us on August 16, 1977. Elvis Presley, the king of rock, was not merely a stage icon. He was a man wrapped in a world of privacy, rhythm, and an unspoken sense of routine that defined his days at Graceland. For most of his life, his home was a sanctuary where his music, his family, and his own personal rhythms intertwined. Yet the final hours that led to his untimely death on August 16, 1977, unfolded with an intimacy and tragedy that few could have imagined. Rumors swirled after the discovery of his body. The notion that the king had slipped away alone in a hotel room or had been visited by a mysterious figure at midnight captured the imagination of the public. Yet the truth, as recent footage and testimonies reveal, is both ordinary and heartbreaking. The night he died, the house was full of familiar faces: his mother, mother-in-law, his stepbrothers, and the Memphis Mafia, each playing their part in the king's daily life. None of those who were in his circle ever left Graceland alone during that final stretch. The first sign of the inevitable came with the early morning light that seeped through the curtains of the living room where Elvis awoke on August 15, 1977. He had begun the day with a quiet morning alongside his daughter, Lisa Marie. Though she was small, her presence in the king's life was a source of comfort and stability. He was also with Ginger Alden, his fiancée, who had chosen not to move in with him at that time, preferring instead to maintain her own space. Their relationship had always been balanced. While the king wanted to share his life more openly, Ginger had her reasons for stepping back, and the king respected that decision. That afternoon, a gentle rhythm of daily life continued. By 10:30 p.m. that night, Elvis and Ginger visited Dr. Lester Hoffman, the dentist who had been attending to the king's ongoing dental issues. The dentist's office was more than a place for routine checkups. It was a hub for the king's medical team, a place where the personal and the professional intersected. Dr. Hoffman, a familiar face, was always on call, ready to provide the king with medication to ease pain, manage insomnia, or calm his restless nights. Whether it was a sedative to help him sleep or a stronger prescription to alleviate a toothache, the king's personal health staff were always present, maintaining a steady rhythm of care that allowed him to perform, rest, and live in his own rhythm. The next morning, on August 16, Elvis set out for a trip, a routine that began with his beloved car. He drove through the gates of Graceland, waving to a small crowd that had gathered to say goodbye. The final photograph taken of the king on that day captured him in a bright blue shirt and a black jacket, sunglasses perched on his head, and a determined smile. That image, frozen in time, has become the last visible reminder of the king's vitality. Later that same day, as the clock on the wall ticked toward the early hours, the king called Dr. George Nichopoulos, his personal physician. At 2:15 a.m., he requested painkillers, a prescription that had always been an integral part of the king's routine. Dr. Nichopoulos, a man who had been with the king for years, understood the delicate balance of the medication that had to be maintained to keep the king comfortable while avoiding complications. The prescribed 6 dilated tablets were meant to ease his pain and help him rest. Yet, in the quiet of the house, as he lay in his bed, the king's body was vulnerable. The next few hours were a quiet, ordinary, and unremarkable part of the day. The house remained the same, with the Memphis Mafia and the Presley family present, and the house staff continuing their routine. At 1:30 p.m., the king's breathing slowed, and his body slipped into the quiet that had always been a part of his daily life at Graceland. It was not a dramatic or isolated event. It was a quiet moment that occurred in the company of those who had known him best. The tragedy of that final day lies in the fact that, for a living legend, the final hours were ordinary and filled with familiar faces, yet the loss was all the more profound because it was not dramatic or heroic, but quiet. The king's final hours were a quiet, almost mundane routine, waking with his daughter, visiting the dentist with his fiancée, driving through the gates, and finally, in the early hours, calling his doctor and taking his medication before slipping into an eternal silence. As the footage of that day unravels, it becomes clear that Elvis's death was not a sensational, lonely event, but a quiet, human moment that was witnessed by those who had cared for him throughout his life. His final hours, set in the warmth of his home, among those who had stood by him, are a testament to the reality of his life at Graceland. The narrative of his death, as it has come to light, is a reminder that even the most celebrated figures are human, subject to the same natural processes and fragile moments that define every life. The night unfurled like an ordinary Thursday, the kind that the king's life at Graceland had long rehearsed. It was just after midnight when Elvis, his voice still humming from the day's performance, reached for his phone and called his stepbrother, Ricky Stanley. Ricky's task that night was simple yet crucial: fetch a fresh supply of medication from Baptist Memorial Hospital's 24-hour pharmacy. By dawn, Ricky returned with a small bag of pills, and the king, eyes still heavy, slid them into his hands, his fingers trembling only with the quiet of the house. At 4 a.m., Elvis pressed the pills into his mouth, the taste of medicine mingling with the faint scent of the night air that seeped through the open windows. He didn't sleep. The early hours were a familiar dance of pain and relief, a cycle that kept the king's body and the very rhythm of his days in balance. He wanted the rest he would need for the show that awaited him in Portland the following evening, a show that would in turn feed the tour that kept his name alive in every city. The next act of that midnight hour was a call to his cousin Billy and Billy's wife, Jo. With a light-hearted invitation to visit Graceland for a quick game of racquetball, Elvis set the tone of an evening that, while late, felt ordinary. The ball bounced across the court, the thud echoing off the walls as the rain poured outside, drumming a steady, almost comforting rhythm on the roof. When Billy expressed his wish that the rain stop, Elvis extended his hand and reassured him with a smile. "Ain't no problem, I'll take care of it." His voice, calm and full of faith, seemed to command the weather itself. It was as if the rain's persistence fell away with a mere thought. The rain lifted in a miraculous moment, leaving the court dry and the players soaked in the sense that nothing could deter their game. After their match, the duo, together with the king, moved toward the piano behind the court. Here, Elvis performed 2 gospel songs, his voice a conduit of quiet devotion that echoed through the house, a final, tender performance that left everyone in a hush of reverence. The night folded into the early morning with the same measured, almost ceremonial pace that defined Elvis's life at Graceland. The soft glow of a bedside lamp flickered in the bedroom, and the hum of the house's machinery was a constant lullaby. Ginger, standing at the edge of the bed, watched the king as he slipped from the warmth of his pajamas into the cool hallway. He carried the same gold-embroidered robe that had cradled him in childhood, now worn as a reminder of the burdens he still carried. In his hand, the book, Scientific Search for the Face of Jesus, felt like a talisman, a silent prayer against the loneliness that sometimes clung to him. Elvis's first act of the day was to leave the bedroom, telling Ginger that he was heading to the bathroom, a statement that carried the weight of an old joke, but also the undercurrent of a chronic ailment. His severe constipation had made bathroom visits a grueling ordeal, and Ginger's gentle warning that he shouldn't stay too long echoed through the hallway. Yet the king had a ritualistic need to make that final trip, and the rhythm of his body pulled him forward. As he walked, he pressed the book against his chest, as if it were a compass. The hallway was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the house's machinery. Hours later, at 2 o'clock, Ginger woke to the house still in its quiet lull. A slight unease tugged at her, but she dismissed it, knowing that Elvis often took hours to move from the bedroom to the bathroom. She dressed, applied makeup, and called her mother, a routine that grounded her. Then she noticed the bedroom door was ajar, but the king was nowhere to be seen. Her heart began to race, yet she tried to keep calm. She asked her mother where he was, and the answer was a quick, "He's out there somewhere." A calm returned, and she walked to the bathroom. The scene that unfolded in the dimly lit room was stark. The toilet seat was open, the bowl used, but the air smelled of antiseptic and something deeper, a silence that seemed too profound for the house. Ginger's hand brushed against a space that was empty, and she realized with a jolt that Elvis was not in the room at all. He lay on the floor, his head tilted, eyes open but unseeing, as if he had fallen, hit his head, and collapsed. It was not a quiet death. It was a sudden, shocking crash. Panicked yet composed, Ginger called Al Strada, the man who had worked the afternoon shift at the house. He had seen many oddities in Graceland, but this was a new kind of tragedy. Ginger asked him to bring Lisa Marie and the rest of the staff. Al drove to the bathroom, and the scene was the same. Elvis lay unresponsive on the floor. The emergency team began to assess, and Al immediately called the ambulance. The ambulance arrived at 2:33 p.m. from the Memphis Fire Department's Engine House 29, the same unit that had responded to a variety of emergencies over the years. Paramedics saw a familiar figure, Elvis, the king, lying on the floor, the air thick with the house's scent. They quickly recognized that this was not a routine incident. The ambulance took him to Baptist Hospital's emergency room at 2:56 p.m., a distance of 7 miles from the house. At 3:30 p.m., after a thorough assessment, a doctor declared that Elvis had died. The news reached the world in the next hour. By 4 o'clock, the world had been forced to face the reality that the king was no longer alive. Millions read the news, and the shock rippled across the globe. The tragedy of a man who had become a symbol of hope and joy, who had taken comfort in the love he gave to his family and the people in his life, was now a stark reality. The day that had begun with quiet routine ended with a sudden, heartbreaking tragedy. And the world had to accept that even someone with fame and strength was still mortal, subject to inevitable death. The narrative of his final hours, framed by the steady cadence of medication and the ritual of his morning routine, shows a man who, despite all the energy and love he radiated, still bore the same physical fragility that had accompanied him from childhood. The layers of medication, painkillers, tranquilizers, and pain-relieving pills were stacked on the bedside table like a complex puzzle, each piece placed by family members or caretakers. When the king took a dose of the pain-relieving pills at 4:30 p.m., he felt the familiar sharp sting of the medication as it dissolved into his bloodstream. He then reached for the phone and dialed his aunt, Deltama Biggs, who answered from the phone in the living room, her voice calm but carrying a tremor of concern. The call was brief, a lifeline in the midst of chaos, and she reassured him that help was on its way. Later that day, the staff gathered in the living room, their faces drained of the usual glow that had once illuminated Graceland. They watched the ambulance depart, the paramedics' white coats flashing against the backdrop of the house's muted colors. The world outside, meanwhile, was watching with bated breath as the news spread. The sudden loss of the king changed everything: how we view rock and roll, how we view celebrity, and how we perceive the power of a legend. In the end, the king became more than a man. He became a symbol of a generation that had never truly grown old. The footage that has now been uncovered, detailing these moments from the night of the incident through the ambulance's arrival and the subsequent medical assessment, offers an unprecedented glimpse into the events that unfolded at Graceland. It exposes the quiet, mundane realities of a household that had always seemed larger than life, and the stark contrast between that calm and the abruptness of tragedy. Each detail, from the rhythm of the hallway hum to the antiseptic scent that lingered in the bathroom, paints a clearer picture of how a legend met his untimely end. The story underscores the enduring truth that behind the icons and the applause lies a fragile humanity, and that even the most powerful figures are ultimately bound to the same mortal fate. The new footage opens with a slow sweep across Graceland's bathroom, the light dim and almost spectral. The worn tiles glimmer faintly, the scent of old vinyl hanging in the air like a memory. In that hush, Ginger, the housekeeper, stands frozen, her face contorting into a shock that feels almost impossible to describe. She clutches a handkerchief, her breath caught, as the camera lingers on the flicker of her eyes, searching for a sign that the king is still alive. It is a moment of pure, unfiltered human terror, one that sits beside the polished myth that has surrounded Elvis for decades. Soon after, the bathroom door opens. Al Strada's silhouette appears against the late afternoon sun slanting through the hallway. He walks in with a slouched gait, the weight of years and secrets on his shoulders evident even in his step. His voice, calm and steady, breaks the silence. "We have to get help." The camera cuts to a hand reaching for the phone, dialing Al's own number. The line buzzes, frantic, as Lisa Marie answers. Together they rally the staff, faces a mix of horror and duty, gathering in the bathroom to confront the unresponsive body. It is a tableau frozen in time, matching the remembered scene with chilling fidelity. The new footage then shifts to the arrival of paramedics, their uniforms stark against the dim interior. Their faces, stoic and composed, convey a professionalism that masks the raw grief underneath. The hum of their breathing fills the silence, a steady rhythm that seems almost musical, echoing the final chords of a song that once filled every room of Graceland. For a brief, almost imperceptible pause, the paramedics glance toward the back of the ambulance, a moment the official reports never captured. It is as if the camera caught a fleeting hesitation, a glimpse of something left unseen. Then the doctor's voice enters, low and grave. "He has died." The footage does not show the hospital doors closing, but instead captures the quiet hum of an empty hallway, the echo of a life ending far from the bright stage lights. The scene is intimate, almost poetic, as it focuses on the king's body lying on the stretcher, the subtle, almost invisible smear of water on the floor, a hint of a fall that might have slipped him away. The paramedics move with a ritualistic precision. Their breathing syncs with the king's heartbeat, their eyes reflecting a quiet sadness that transcends the official narrative. In the final minutes, one paramedic lifts a hand to the king's shoulder, placing it gently. It is a gesture that speaks of reverence, a quiet acknowledgement of a man who had touched countless lives. The camera captures the softening of his eyes, a subtle connection that goes beyond the role of a medical professional to something almost familial. As the ambulance pulls to a stop at the gate of Baptist Hospital, the camera pulls back to reveal the sterile white corridor, the sign "Emergency" illuminated. The paramedics exit, the weight of the king's coffin carried on a stretcher, and the doctor enters with a solemn nod. A close-up of the doctor's face shows him speaking. He had a heart attack. The damage was too great. He died. The footage suggests that the internal event was not fully visible until the ambulance's arrival, a revelation that adds a layer of complexity to the tragedy. Throughout, the house itself becomes a silent stage, absorbing the loss as if it were a living entity mourning with its occupants. The familiar wallpaper, the hum of the old refrigerator, and the quiet stillness in the room paint a stark contrast to the earlier days of music and applause. The footage invites reflection on the humanity of a man who, while standing under bright stage lights, was still vulnerable to a simple, wet floor. The revelation that the king's final moments were captured in a private bathroom, surrounded by the mundane and the ordinary, forces us to confront the gap between legend and mortality. It reminds us that behind every headline, every accolade, there was a man who could slip on a wet floor and die. It is a sobering reminder that no matter how bright a star, the day will come when the lights go out and the applause fades into the hush of a funeral in a private house. The new footage, silent yet profound, does more than fill gaps in the story. It humanizes a myth, bringing to life the quiet reality that no matter how bright a star, the day will come when the lights go out. It is a testament to the enduring truth that even the greatest of legends are ultimately bound by the same fragile threads that bind all of us. The final frame of the recording lingers on the sterile corridor, the emergency sign glinting in the dim light before the camera cuts to black. As the screen fades, the sound of distant traffic begins to swell, a faint but unmistakable echo of the world outside. It is as though the footage has opened a door, inviting viewers to step beyond the house and witness what follows. In the hush that follows, the family gathers around the table, the heavy weight of loss settling in their joints. Their hands, once steady on instruments or on the stage, tremble now as they grasp each other's forearms, a silent vow that they will go out together. They dress in plain, modest attire, a deliberate contrast to the glitter that once surrounded the king on stage. The choice of simple gray suits and subdued black dresses speaks to a truth that the footage had already hinted at. Behind the fame was a man who, in his final moments, had simply walked into the world as any other soul might. The decision to go out in this sober fashion is both a practical response to the funeral arrangements and a symbolic gesture, an acknowledgement that the king has stepped from the limelight into the ordinary streets that had always been there, unseen. Outside, the neighborhood is quiet. A few neighbors peek through curtains, their faces etched with a mix of reverence and sorrow. The first of them, Mrs. Alvarez, opens her window to let in a breath of cool night air. Her hand hovers over the railing of the balcony, as if she could feel the weight of the king's absence reverberating through the brick walls of her own home. She looks at the street, where the street lights flicker like tired applause, and whispers, "We go out together." Her words echo the earlier sentiment that, no matter how bright the stage, the night always returns to silence. The family's exit from the house is careful, deliberate. The car's engine hums to life. The tires crunch against the gravel driveway. The camera follows them, capturing the quiet, almost reverent motion of a group heading into the night. As they drive, the scenery shifts from the familiar interior of the house to the winding streets of the town. The king's car, which once glittered in the center of a stage, now rides silently among the ordinary vehicles that pepper the roads. The footage, which had shown the king lying on a stretcher in a sterile corridor, now juxtaposes that sterile scene with the familiar glow of street lamps, the scent of rain on asphalt, the faint hum of a distant radio station playing old classics. The journey is not merely physical, it is a symbolic passage. The king's family steps out of the house that had sheltered the echoes of his songs and into the wider world that has always stood as his backdrop. The road they travel is lined with the faces of neighbors and fans, each with their own memories of the king's voice. Some hold flowers, others hold candles, all bear the weight of a shared grief. The footage subtly captures this mosaic of people, each silhouette etched against the night, each moving forward in collective silence. The narrative here is clear. Death is not a private event confined within a single house. It is a communal departure, a moment when the whole community goes out to witness the loss of a beloved figure. In the midst of this procession, a quiet moment breaks out. The family pauses at a small park, the benches worn by decades of visitors. The youngest son, still in his teenage years, looks up at the sky, his hand resting on the edge of the bench. His eyes, reflecting the muted stars, hold a question that many of us face in the wake of such loss. What does it mean to leave? The footage captures this pause, a fleeting hesitation that feels both personal and universal. It is in this pause that the narrative invites viewers to consider the king's humanity, a man who, in the final minutes, had a body that reacted with a simple, silent, and utterly ordinary fall. Later, as the family reaches the cemetery, the footage shifts again. The gates of the cemetery stand open, a literal invitation to leave the world of the living. The cemetery's rows of headstones, each one telling a story of a life that has ended, form a landscape of remembrance. The camera frames the family as they walk down the path, hands intertwined, a small, fragile band of humanity stepping forward into the unknown. The king's final resting place is marked by a plain headstone, the words "Gone but not forgotten" etched in the stone. The footage, with its raw, unfiltered gaze, leaves no doubt that the king's death was, at its core, an ordinary step, his last act of going out into the world. When the procession reaches the burial site, the community gathers in quiet tribute. The sound of a single violin, played softly, floats across the grounds, echoing the melody that had once filled stadiums. The footage captures the tearful faces, the solemn nods, the hand that lifts a small flag. It shows how the king's passing is a reminder that even legends are not immune to the simple mechanics of life, a fall, a heart attack, a moment of stillness that marks the end. The footage does not romanticize or dramatize the event. Instead, it invites viewers to see the king not as an untouchable icon, but as a man whose last steps were ordinary and, ultimately, deeply human. In the final scenes, the camera lingers on the empty streets, the night air cool, the streetlights dimming one by one. The footage ends with the image of a single candle, its flame trembling against the wind, a symbol of a life that once illuminated the world. The narrative closes not on a grand spectacle, but on a quiet, personal farewell. It reminds us that to truly honor someone, we must recognize their humanity, their vulnerability, and the quiet final act of going out. In the end, the footage serves as a testament to the enduring truth that every star, no matter how bright, must someday step into the ordinary night, leaving behind a legacy that lives on in the stories of those who continue to go out and remember. In the final scenes, the camera lingers on the empty streets, the night air cool, the streetlights dimming one by one. The footage ends with the image of a single candle, its flame trembling against the wind, a symbol of a life that once illuminated the world. The narrative closes not on a grand spectacle, but on a quiet, personal farewell. It reminds us that to truly honor someone, we must recognize their humanity, their vulnerability, and the quiet final act of going out. In the end, the footage serves as a testament to the enduring truth that every star, no matter how bright, must someday step into the ordinary night, leaving behind a legacy that lives on in the stories of those who continue to go out and remember.